Hi everyone and welcome to the internet. So what we're going to be doing in today's lesson is having a look at pyramids of biomass and what biomass is and how we can use it. So to start us off then, two questions based around our previous lesson. Have a go at answering those in your book. I'm only going to give you a couple of minutes to do that today. Let's check those answers then. So for number one, the three types of ecological relationship are predation, mutualism and parasitism. Give yourself a mark for each of those you got right. And then for our second one, describing that relationship, you can see I've given you the marks on the screen there. So a mark if you've said when prey numbers are high, predators numbers will increase. A mark if you've said that's because there's more food available for them. Another mark if you've said that this leads to more prey being eaten, so the prey numbers decrease. Another mark if you've then said limited number of prey means predator numbers decrease due to lack of food. And the final one for pointing out that we have this slight delay to that change in the other population. So if you need a bit longer just to mark your answers, obviously hit pause now. Otherwise, add up your score, and obviously we've got a maximum of 8 today. So write down your scores out of 8 in your books. So one type of pyramid that you should have met lower down the schooling key stage 3 is the pyramid of numbers. Now hopefully we remember that a pyramid of numbers, then the length of each of the bars represents the number of organisms within that trophic level. So write down the top sentence and then have a go answering the couple of questions underneath. Just going to give you about a minute and a half to do that. When it comes to pyramids of numbers, then because the length of the bar represents the number of that organism, then it will not always be pyramid shaped. So we've got two examples on our screen there. On the left we do have a pyramid shaped one, but on the right we don't. Because if we look at the one on the right, we only have a single oak tree. So there's one oak tree that can actually have loads and loads of insects living on it. So we've got a narrow bar at the bottom and then a wider bar. So pyramids of numbers will not always be pyramid shaped because it's purely based around the number of organisms, and one large organism can support a lot of smaller ones. Next thing I'd like you to try and do in your books is to explain the link between trophic level, the size of the organism, and the population. So I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to do that for me. So write your answers in your books. So hopefully we managed to come up with the idea that when we talk about biomass, that's the amount of living material that something is made from. So if we use biomass, then the population and the size of the organisms is taken into account. So that means that when we're drawing a bar for the trophic level, then it will always get smaller the further along the food chain we go. If you didn't get that answer, then obviously write it down in your books for me. And the key thing we need to remember is the bit in black at the bottom of the screen there, that pyramids of biomass will always be pyramid shaped because of this. So because it's looking at not only the number but the size of the organisms, then the bars will always be widest with our first step in our food chain, so that initial trophic level, and then they will get smaller the further along we go. So I'll just leave that up for about another 30 seconds to give you a chance to write it down. So this is what we see with our pyramid of biomass. Our oak tree at the bottom, so that's our initial trophic level, our producers, will always be the widest bar, and then the further along the food chain we go, then the smaller the bars get. So pyramids of biomass, always pyramid shaped. The next thing I'd like you to do is to see if you can come up with a suggestion on how to work out the biomass within a food chain. So write down your ideas in your book. I'm just going to give you about 40 seconds to do that. Let's check those answers then. So if you said somewhere in your answer that we need to take samples from each trophic level, give yourself a tick. If you then said we find the average mass of organisms from each trophic level, tick for that one. And if we then said the average mass is multiplied by the population size, you get a tick for that one. Obviously, if you didn't get those answers or if you weren't sure, then make sure you write down those 3 sentences on how we work out the biomass. So samples from each trophic level, average mass for each trophic level is calculated, and then average mass times by the population size gives us the total biomass. So I'll leave this up for about another 30 seconds to give you a chance to write it down. If you need longer, obviously you can just pause the video. Now, when it actually comes to us producing our pyramids of biomass, then we want to use something called the dry mass of an organism. Now, the dry mass of an organism is basically where we've removed all of the water from it. So it's purely the mass of the organism without any water there. So write down that top sentence for me and then see if you can answer the two questions underneath. The reason for it and the problem of doing this. Let's check to see what we got then. So hopefully we said the reason that we do this is because the water content can vary between individuals. So it's not good to record the mass with water because it can change based on whether an animal has had a drink or not. And the second one, why it's a problem? Well, in order to actually remove all of the water from a living thing, it's not going to survive this process. If we're extracting all of the water from you, we're pretty much chucking you in a kiln and drying you out. Now, you're not going to survive this. So what we need to know is that the problem, we require the organism to be killed and then dried out in a kiln. So get those 2 points written down if you haven't already. So what I'd like you to have a go at then is drawing a pyramid of biomass for the data in the table. So think about what you might need to do, think about the steps that you may need to follow, and think back to the picture I showed you of a pyramid of biomass earlier on in this lesson. So I want you to have a go at doing this without me giving you any more guidance. So see if you can produce one of those in your books for me. So I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to do that. Okay, so in order to actually work this one out then, is we need to start off by selecting a scale. So what we've got up here are the total biomasses, and in the question they give you a pre-printed bit of graph paper as well. So what we need to do is find a scale that works, and there will be something that's pretty obvious on these questions if past questions are anything to go by. So if we have a look here, our biggest one is the oak tree with 350 kilograms. And then if we count the number of squares we've got on our bit of graph paper, we've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. So the easiest thing to do is say that 10 kilograms to one of the smaller squares. So based on that then, what we're going to have are 35 squares for the oak tree. So let's just jot these ones in for us as a reminder. So we're going to use 35 squares for the oak tree, 20 for the caterpillar, 10 for the blue tit, and just 1 for our sparrowhawk. Now what we're going to do then is we always start at the bottom. So remember, when we're doing these, we always start at the bottom. So if it's 35, what we're going to do is we're going to draw our bar. Now when you do this on the exam, you're going to make sure that you are using a ruler and a pencil, so that if you make a mistake you can rub it out, because remember, this is the only bit of graph paper they're giving you. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So you'd measure your 35 or count your squares and you plot your bar. So that's our first one, that's our oak tree. Notice how our producer goes at the bottom, so we always put that one as the bottom bar. So our next one, the caterpillar, we need 20 squares for this one. So what we're going to do, and I'm not going to do it dead central just for ease of this, is we are going to then plot our bar for our caterpillar. So 5, 10, 15, 20. Then we need to do 10 squares for the blue tit. So let's just select the 10 squares for our blue tits, 5 and 10, and then a single square for the sparrowhawk. So we just do our single square for the sparrowhawk. Now if that's all you do, then you are going to get a mark, but that's not all of it, because remember, what we also need to do is we need to label those bars, and it's absolutely fine to put it off to one side. So all you need to do is put the names of each of those organisms in place afterwards. So we've got the sparrowhawk, we've got the blue tit, we've got the caterpillar, and you can write inside the bar as well if you prefer. It's just that sometimes you're going to find it won't fit inside the bar. But once you've done that, that's it. That's the top marks on this question. So we pick our scale, we then use that scale to plot our bars onto the piece of graph paper, and then we label each of those bars in turn, remembering always to put the producer at the bottom of the graph paper, and then you just work your way up. So what we've looked at up to this point is how we can draw these pyramids of numbers and pyramids of biomass. Now what we're going to go on to is to have a look and see what we're actually talking about with this biomass being transferred from one trophic level to another. So what I've got for you on the screen here then are 5 sentences, I think, where we're going to have a go at filling in the blanks using the words at the bottom of the screen. So write the sentences in your books, filling in the blanks with the words in the red box at the bottom. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do that. Let's check those answers then. So energy is transferred to producers by sunlight, give yourself a tick. Only about 1% of this energy is transferred to chemical stores, tick that one. Most of the light is reflected off the leaf. The proportion of the remaining energy transferred to chemical stores via photosynthesis is limited by factors such as temperature and sunlight availability. So obviously mark those correct and then add up your scores and give yourself a score out of 6 next to that. So hopefully what we can see then is that when we're talking about biomass being transferred along a food chain, this is not a perfect process. Not all of the energy from one trophic level ends up in the next. So what we're actually seeing is biomass isn't all going to be transferred. If we think about photosynthesis then, about half of the energy transferred by photosynthesis ends up being transferred in respiration. So about half of that energy from the sun is being transferred in respiration first of all, and that means only about half is left to go into increasing biomass. So make sure you've got the 2 sentences written in your books. What we find if we think about the consumers in a food chain then, is that at each trophic level, those consumers will convert around 10% of their chemical energy to new body tissue. So that means we've got very limited amounts of the energy coming into the organism being transferred into new biomass. So there are 4 ways that biomass is lost. I want you to write down that top sentence and then see if you can name those 4 ways that biomass is lost in our food chain. So I'll give you about a minute to do that. The 4 ways then that biomass is lost. First of all, not all of the organism is eaten. If we think about a rabbit eating grass, they don't sit there and dig the roots out of the ground in order to get every single fragment of the grass. Just like when animals eat other animals, then they won't eat literally all of it. There could well be skeleton left on the ground. So not all the organism eaten is 1. The second is that biomass is used in respiration. So that process we need to make ATP to allow muscles to contract, etc., that's another way we're using some of our biomass. The third is a process called egestion, and this is where any undigested material ends up as the feces, which is passed out of the body. And finally, the process of excretion, which is all of those waste products we make in our body being lost as urine. So 4 ways we lose biomass. Not all of the organism is eaten. Biomass is used in respiration, egestion, and excretion. Make sure you've got those written in your books. Hopefully what we can see there then is that as we move along a food chain, then the amount of energy that we are passing from one stage to the next is decreasing. So what this means is that food chains are going to have a finite length. They're limited, and usually they're limited to around 4 trophic levels because of this energy loss at each stage. If we try and go beyond 4 trophic levels, then there's just insufficient energy to support life. So if they ask you a question about why food chains are limited in their length, it's because energy gets lost at each stage of the food chain, which means after 4 trophic levels, there's insufficient energy to support life. So make sure you got those 2 sentences written in your books. The last thing we need to look at today then is our calculation for this. So they could ask you to calculate the efficiency of the biomass transfer. And in order to do that, we use this calculation on the screen. So the biomass available after the transfer divided by the biomass available before the transfer, and then we multiply that by 100 because it's a percentage. So make sure you've got that written in your books for me. The kind of question we could be asked using that calculation is this. A lamb gains 12 kilograms in mass after consuming 150 kilograms of grass. Calculate the efficiency of the transfer. So have a go at working that out. Show your working in your books. When it comes to working this out, efficiency is the biomass after divided by the biomass before times 100. So our biomass before is 150, the biomass after is 12. So we need to do 12 divided by 150, because remember, after divided by before, and then multiply that by 100, which gives us 8%. So tick that if you got it right. Very final thing then is our plenary. So if your target grade is up to a grade 5, the 2 on the left. If your target grade is over a grade 5, it's the questions on the right. So get those answered in your book. So I'll leave this up for about a minute today, but if you're going to need longer, obviously just hit pause on the video now. As always, you can find the answers to the plenary over on my website, sciencewright.weebly.com. You'll also be able to find that under the Internet tab. Just select the week that we're in, and then you'll be able to find things like the lesson PowerPoints, the answers to the plenary, any additional work, and if there's any little experiments I thought you could do at home, then they're there too. So have a look and get using that.